I'm going to take you straight to the moment most families never imagine they'll face. A moment no spouse wants to believe could happen in their own home. The day my law enforcement officer sat alone in his truck with a fully loaded gun, a hand on the trigger, and whispering to his late father, "Dad, I'll see you soon." My name is Amy Cortez, and I'm the mother of two and a spouse of a law enforcement officer who has served for over 30 years in his community and now serving as sheriff of Hancock County, Ohio. And yes, the story I'm about to tell you is my husband's darkest moment because as spouses and family, we often think it won't happen in my family or it won't happen with my spouse. The podcast Code 44 exists because families need to understand the weight our loved ones carry before the line breaks for them. Because what happened to Mike can happen to anyone, in any agency, in any small town, in any big city, at any stage of their career. There are no warning alarms that go off when the demons get louder than their logic. And the only reason Mike is alive today is because of divine intervention. The moment happened years before Mike and I dated. We had known each other since we were 5, small-town kids from Northwest Ohio, graduated high school in 1992 in a class of 52. Then life happened and we went our separate ways. I always remember Mike as the super nice guy, even when teenage boys were being just crazy and dumb. Mike was just respectful, kind, a little bit ornery, never mean, and never arrogant, just a good person. He followed in his dad's footsteps into law enforcement and served in multiple roles from corrections to road patrol, eventually leading a drug task force in a neighboring community, and later a sergeant of the road patrol. From the outside, he seemed like the guy who had it all together. Helpful, capable, strong, the guy you assume is fine because everything looks fine. But here's the truth I didn't know then. He was fighting a battle that no one could see. Years before we connected, his world was quietly crumbling. He was dealing with failed relationships, internal conflicts that he just couldn't name, and the job was eating away at him. He started experiencing triggers, especially when he was off duty and heard sirens. He didn't know why, and no one had taught him what those symptoms had meant. He told me later that he became really good friends with Gentleman Jack, meaning bottles of whiskey, because it was the only thing he said that numbed the demons. But over time, 2 glasses became a bottle. And a bottle became what he needed just to feel quiet inside. His story is so incredibly important for us to hear because sometimes we feel invincible and that bad things aren't going to happen to us. We feel like our loved ones are handling everything okay, and because that's what we want to see. Let me take you to that Christmas Eve. Many, many years ago, the day everything almost ended for a law enforcement officer who appeared to have it all together. Mike was recently on a podcast called Truly Mental, where he personally shares his own story. I will link it in the show descriptions if you want to hear the full interview in his own words. Today, I'm just going to share a portion of his story. His family was supposed to leave on this Christmas Eve at a certain time to visit his dad's gravesite. It's something that they did every year. And like some families, they weren't ready on time. He got really irritated, probably more irritated than the situation deserved, and said, "Forget it, I'll just meet you all there." It was only a 15-minute drive, so he just went on alone. I'm guessing that the demons must have been speaking louder that day than reason. And the weight of the years of trauma that he had buried and never processed had finally risen to the top. He walked to his father's headstone and he told him, "Dad, I'll see you soon." He got back in his truck. He opened the center console and he took out a loaded handgun. He raised it towards his head and then saw something move in his rearview mirror. His family had pulled up into the cemetery. When they tell the story, they share that it had been hours before they actually met him at the gravesite. He swears it was just a few minutes. And I believe both to be true because trauma distorts time. But here's the part that still gives me chills. Had his family just been 15 seconds later, I'd be telling a different story right now. But here's what I need spouses and families to hear. This event didn't happen because Mike was weak. It didn't happen because he planned it. He didn't wake up that morning wanting to die. It happened because the job, the trauma, the silence, the stigma, the burying of the trauma had finally exploded. And that's what terrifies me for all families, friends, and spouses of law enforcement today. I'm guessing that many of you listening are thinking, my spouse would never do that. My husband's too strong. My wife's not suicidal. They don't seem depressed. I'm sure they would tell me if something was wrong. But here's the hard truth. Mike didn't know he was going to do it that day. That's why this episode exists. Not to scare you and not to dramatize, but to bring awareness. Because when a brain carries trauma, decades of it, something eventually gives away. I remember hearing the story of another spouse whose husband did take his own life. And I remember her saying, "Amy, I know my husband did not have plans that day to take his own life." It's the same narrative that Mike gave. Unfortunately, her situation ended much differently. This is an important point that I want everyone to hear. At the time surrounding this incident, Mike was terrified to tell anyone that he was struggling. He told me years later, after this event, "I thought if the sheriff knew, I'd lose my badge, my gun, my career, everything." The stigma forced him into silence. The silence fed the demons, and the demons almost won. This is exactly why Code 44 exists, to break the silence, to prepare you as families, to help you recognize the small shifts before they become a critical moment. This story is so important to me because 3 months prior to this event, Mike and I had reconnected as old high school acquaintances. He was teaching self-defense classes and I wanted to get my concealed carry. I had absolutely no idea that the man who was teaching me the concealed carry class, cracking jokes, being charming and fun, was 3 months away from the darkest hour of his entire life. I would have never known it by the way that he interacted and communicated. And that's what should scare us because of the stigma and because they feel like they cannot share their struggle. They can easily mask it unbelievably well. It's what they're trained to do. They can laugh, they can teach, they can serve, they can show up with jokes. and they can show up every day in their community with a smile on their face. And at the same time, they can be collapsing internally. Not because they want to, but because it's what culture has taught them to do. Here's what I want spouses and family members to take away. The law enforcement officer, they don't see the break coming. There is no countdown timer to suicidal ideations. You won't always see clear signs. It's not as if they're crying or withdrawing or having dramatic behavior. Sometimes it's just that quiet ride to the cemetery. The signs are subtle and often dismissed. I talk about some of these signs in other episodes. Trauma builds slowly, silently, and then all at once. I hear my husband say to other officers, the slope is slippery and it is fast. And if you're hearing them say, I'm fine, it should mean very little to you. Your spouse may be carrying the darkest thought of their life behind that single little word. You cannot assume they are safe just because they seem okay. Mike seemed okay. Mike shares his story publicly now, not because it's easy, because it's not, but because he knows that it saves lives. He tells officers, it's a slippery slope, and I was on it. Don't let yourself get there. We share this story as a family because no one is exempt from the mental toll of the job. Not the strongest person, not the most experienced person, and not the one who laughs it off. Not the ones who seem happy and not the ones who lead agencies. Anyone can fall into a dark hole. But anyone can also be pulled out of it if we speak it out loud. Getting help saves lives. A counselor, the right counselor, saved Mike's life. Not by waving a magic wand because there isn't one. And not by erasing the trauma because they can't. But by helping him speak it out loud, those buried words. To this day, 10 years later, when he sees his counselor, he will still tell me, I didn't even know half of that was in there until she dug it out. That's the power of talk therapy. That's the power of EMDR and the power of not staying silent. If your spouse ever says, I'm fine, I can handle it, I'm made for this job, your response needs to be no. I love you too much to let you fight this alone and to accept those answers. We cannot normalize this occupation. We cannot pretend trauma doesn't accumulate. If this story shook you a little, good. It should. That means you're paying attention. My prayer is that this episode wakes up the awareness in your home, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Because the earliest signs are subtle, and catching them early can save a life. Mike and I share this because we want your story to end differently than it could have for us. We need to recognize, we need to respond, and we need to support our law enforcement officers before the line breaks. Let me end us with a prayer. Lord, thank you for protecting Mike that day and for every officer who is still fighting battles no one else can see. Open our eyes to the hidden signs. Give us courage to speak when silence feels easier. And surround every family listening with your protection, your wisdom, and your presence. Help us to step in before darkness takes root and guide our loved ones back into the light. Amen. Mike and I have been walking this road together for the last 7 years, learning, unlearning, and figuring out what actually helps. What works for us might not work for you. In the first 6 episodes, I share several of the tools and the conversations that have helped us navigate the weight of the job. If you haven't listened, I encourage you to start there. And as we move forward, I will be bringing in other spouses and trusted experts to share their stories and their insights. So please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the conversation that could help your family before the line breaks.